The blood on Lydia Sutton's dress had long dried into stiff brown patches by the time she stumbled into Bozeman, Montana. But it was the way she clutched the doctor's sleeve that made the townsfolk whisper behind their hands. 3 days she had been at Doc Henderson's place, and 3 days she had barely let go of anyone who came near, her fingers wrapping around wrists and elbows, like she feared the earth itself might swallow her whole if she lost contact with another living soul. The women at the mercantile clucked their tongues and shook their heads, saying that poor girl was too much, too needy, too broken from whatever had happened on that wagon train she had escaped from. But high in the mountains above town, a man named Zachary Roth heard those same stories when he came down for supplies, and something in his chest pulled tight at the thought of a woman so desperate for human connection that she could not let go. It was late September of 1877, and the autumn air had started to bite with the promise of the brutal Montana winter to come. Zachary stood 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle earned from years of trapping and hunting in the wilderness, his dark brown hair falling past his shoulders in waves that he tied back with a leather cord when he worked. His hands were calloused and scarred, his jaw covered with a thick beard, and his gray eyes held the sharp awareness of a man who had survived alone in country that killed softer men without mercy. He had come down from his cabin to trade pelts and stock up on flour, salt, and ammunition, not to get involved in town drama. But Mrs. Palmer at the general store would not stop talking about the poor Sutton girl. She is sleeping in Doc Henderson's back room. But he says he cannot keep her much longer, Mrs. Palmer said, wrapping Zachary's purchases in brown paper with efficient movements. The wagon train she was with got attacked by raiders 2 weeks back. Her parents, her brother, all of them gone. She was the only one who made it out. Hid under bodies for a whole night before she could run. Been walking ever since. Doc says her feet were bleeding through her boots when she got here. Zachary felt something heavy settle in his gut. He had seen plenty of violence in his 32 years, had dealt his share of it when necessary. But the thought of a young woman lying beneath corpses while raiders tore through everything she knew made his jaw clench. "She have anywhere to go?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that made Mrs. Palmer look up from her counting. Not a soul. The train was heading to Oregon, but she was the only survivor from her family's wagon. The other survivors went on ahead a week ago, but she was too shaken to travel. "Honestly, Mr. Roth, I do not know what will become of her. She's only 21, and she cannot seem to function without holding on to someone. It is quite unseemly, really. The doc says it is shock, but folks are starting to talk." Zachary pulled out his money and paid without responding. He had learned long ago that the best way to avoid town gossip was to say nothing that could be repeated. But as he loaded his pack mule and prepared for the ride back up to his cabin, he found his feet turning toward Doc Henderson's house instead of toward the mountain trail. Doc Henderson was a graying man in his 50s, with kind eyes and steady hands that had set more broken bones than anyone in 3 counties. He answered Zachary's knock with surprise evident on his weathered face. "Zachary Roth, as I live and breathe. Have not seen you in near 6 months. You hurt?" "No, Doc. Heard about the girl from the wagon train. Mrs. Palmer says she is staying with you." Understanding dawned in the doctor's eyes, followed by something that looked like relief. "Miss Sutton, yes. Come in, come in. Fair warning. She is fragile as spun glass right now." Zachary followed him into the neat house that smelled of carbolic and dried herbs. In the back room, sitting on a narrow bed with her knees drawn up to her chest, was the thinnest woman Zachary had ever seen. Her blonde hair hung in a braid over one shoulder, and her blue eyes were huge in her pale face. She wore a borrowed dress that hung loose on her frame. And when those eyes fixed on him, Zachary saw a terror so profound It made his chest ache. "Miss Sutton, this is Zachary Roth. He lives up in the mountains. Came down for supplies," Doc Henderson said gently. Lydia's eyes tracked between the two men, and Zachary noticed how her hand gripped the edge of the blanket until her knuckles went white. "Hello, Miss Sutton," Zachary said, keeping his voice soft despite its natural depth. He had learned to gentle his tone when approaching wounded animals, and right now this woman looked more skittish than any deer he had ever tracked. "Hello?" she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, like she had screamed it raw. Doc Henderson gestured for Zachary to follow him back to the front room. Once they were out of earshot, the older man sighed heavily. "She cannot stay here much longer. My wife is coming back from her sister's place in 3 days, and we do not have room for a long-term guest. The church ladies offered to take her in, but every time someone tries to leave her alone, she has attacks where she cannot breathe. She needs someone with her all the time, and folks in town are not equipped for that kind of need. What about work? Can she earn her keep somewhere? Not in the state she is in. She can barely make it from the bed to the washroom without panicking. I have seen this before in soldiers after bad battles. The mind breaks from the horror, and it takes time to heal, if it ever does. She needs somewhere safe and someone patient." Zachary looked back toward the room where Lydia sat. He thought about his cabin, solid and warm, with 2 rooms and a good fireplace. He thought about the long winter coming, the silence of the snow-covered mountains, and the fact that he had not spoken to another soul for days on end, more times than he could count. He thought about how that silence had never bothered him before. But somehow the idea of this broken woman having no safe place to heal made his solitary life seem suddenly hollow. "I will take her," he said, before he could think better of it. Doc Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "Up to your cabin? Zachary, that is a hard life, even for someone healthy and whole. She can barely walk a straight line right now. You said she needs someone with her all the time. I live alone. I am there all the time, and no one is going to raid my cabin or hurt her under my roof. If she needs to hold on to someone to feel safe, then that is what she will do. Better than being passed around town like an unwanted burden." The doctor studied him for a long moment. "You know what people will say. An unmarried man and woman living alone together. Do I look like I care what people say?" Zachary kept his gaze steady. "She needs help. I can provide it. If her reputation matters more than her survival, then the folks in this town have their priorities backward." A slow smile spread across Doc Henderson's face. "I always knew there was a soft heart under all that mountain man exterior. Let me talk to her, see if she's willing. Fair warning, though, she does not let go easy once she trusts someone." "Good," Zachary said. "I am not going anywhere." The conversation with Lydia took longer than expected. Zachary waited in the front room, listening to the low murmur of Doc Henderson's voice through the thin walls. He could not make out words, but he heard the fear in Lydia's responses, the way her voice would spike with panic before the doctor's calm tones settled her again. Finally, Doc Henderson emerged with Lydia following close behind, her hand wrapped tight around his arm. "Miss Sutton is willing to try it," the doctor said. "But she wants to meet you properly first. Talk a bit, see if she can manage." Zachary nodded and lowered himself carefully onto one of the doctor's wooden chairs, trying to make himself less imposing. Even sitting, he was broad and tall, his arms thick with muscle that strained against his worn flannel shirt. He watched as Lydia and the doctor sat across from him, noticed how she positioned herself so she could bolt if needed. "Miss Sutton, I know you do not know me from Adam," Zachary started, keeping his hands relaxed on his knees where she could see them. but I have a cabin about 2 hours' ride up into the mountains. It is solid, warm, and far from anyone who might hurt you. I am gone most days checking trap lines, but I am always back by dark. I am offering you a place to stay until you are ready to figure out what comes next. No expectations, no pressure. You would have your own room, your own space. Lydia stared at him with those huge eyes, and Zachary felt the weight of her assessment. He had been judged by plenty of people in his life, found wanting by society's standards because he preferred solitude and honest work to pretense and politics. But having this fragile woman judge whether he was safe felt more important than any of those past evaluations. Why would you help me? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Because you need help, and I can give it. That is reason enough. The people in town say I am too much, that I cling too tight, that I cannot function like a normal person. Her eyes filled with tears. They think I am broken. Zachary leaned forward slightly, holding her gaze. Miss Sutton, you survived something that would have killed most people. If holding on to someone while you heal is what you need, then that is not being too much. That is being human. And anyone who thinks otherwise has never faced real hardship. A tear slipped down her cheek. What if I cannot stop? What if I never get better? Then you hold on as long as you need to. I have lived 32 years mostly alone, Miss Sutton. If you need someone steady to anchor to while you find your footing again, I am about as steady as they come. The silence stretched between them while Lydia processed his words. Her hand was still wrapped around Doc Henderson's arm, but her eyes had not left Zachary's face. He saw the moment something shifted in her expression, a tiny crack in the wall of fear that let a sliver of hope through. Okay, she said finally. I will try. Doc Henderson smiled with relief. Good. I think this is the best solution for everyone. Zachary, you will need some supplies for her. Let me make a list. The next hour was a flurry of activity. Doc Henderson compiled everything Lydia would need, from warmer clothes to basic necessities. Mrs. Palmer at the mercantile raised her eyebrows so high they disappeared under her bonnet when Zachary returned with his list. But she filled the order without comment, though her mouth was pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Zachary paid cash for everything and loaded it onto his mule with his other supplies. When he returned to Doc Henderson's house, Lydia was waiting with a small bundle of her own possessions. She wore a heavier dress now, and someone had found her a warm coat. But she still looked impossibly fragile. Her hand was wrapped around Doc Henderson's wrist, and Zachary could see the tension in her shoulders. Miss Sutton, have you ridden a horse before? Zachary asked. She nodded. We had horses back in Illinois before we sold everything for the wagon train. Good. You will ride with me. My horse is steady and sure-footed, but the mountain trail can be rough. You will need to hold on tight. Something flickered in her eyes at those words, and he realized she was testing him, waiting to see if he would flinch at the idea of her clinging to him. Instead, he held out his hand, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. Whenever you are ready, he said quietly. Lydia looked at his hand for a long moment. It was huge, scarred, and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard and lived harder. Slowly, she released Doc Henderson's wrist and reached for Zachary. Her hand was tiny in his, her fingers ice-cold despite the warm afternoon. He closed his grip gently, not trapping her, just holding steady. Thank you, Doc, Zachary said, nodding to the older man. I will bring her down for a checkup in a few weeks, see how she's managing. You take care of her, Zachary. And Miss Sutton, you hold on as tight as you need to. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Lydia managed a wobbly smile. Thank you for everything, Dr. Henderson. The walk to where Zachary had left his horse felt eternal. Lydia's hand never left his, her grip tightening whenever someone passed them on the street. Zachary kept his pace slow and steady, not rushing her, letting her adjust to each new stimulus. His horse, a massive bay gelding named Goliath, stood patiently by the hitching post, and his pack mule was tied alongside. This is Goliath, Zachary said. He is gentle as a lamb, despite his size. I am going to mount up first, then help you up behind me. You will need to hold on to me the whole ride. The trail gets steep in places. He watched her face carefully, making sure she understood and agreed before he moved. When she nodded, he released her hand just long enough to swing himself into the saddle, then immediately reached down for her. Lydia grasped his forearm with both hands, and he lifted her up behind him, as if she weighed nothing at all. She wrapped her arms around his waist instantly, pressing tight against his back, and he felt her whole body trembling. I have you, he said over his shoulder. You will not fall, I promise. The ride up into the mountains was slow and careful. Zachary kept Goliath to a steady walk, navigating the winding trail with the ease of long practice. Behind him, Lydia clung with a desperation that spoke of every fear she carried. Her arms were locked around his waist, her face pressed between his shoulder blades, and he could feel her shaking through his heavy coat. Tell me about Illinois, he said after a while, thinking conversation might distract her from the height and the unfamiliar terrain. Her voice was muffled against his back. It is flat, so flat you can see for miles. My father had a farm, corn and wheat mostly. We had a creek that ran through the property where my brother and I would catch crawdads in the summer. What made your family head west? The farm failed. 2 bad years in a row, and we lost everything. Father heard about cheap land in Oregon, good soil, plenty of water. He sold what was left and bought a spot on the wagon train. Mother did not want to go, but we did not have a choice. Her arms tightened. I wish we had stayed. I would rather be poor in Illinois than here without them. I am sorry you lost them, Zachary said, meaning it. That kind of pain does not go away quick. Did you lose someone? My parents and my younger sister. Fire took the house when I was 18. I was out hunting, came back to find nothing but ashes and bodies. That is when I came to Montana, built my cabin, learned to live alone. Seemed easier than staying around people who reminded me of everything I lost. Lydia was quiet for a moment. Does it ever get easier? The pain changes shape, gets less sharp, more of an ache than a knife. But you learn to carry it, and eventually, you find new things worth living for. They rode in silence after that. The only sounds the steady clomp of Goliath's hooves on the rocky trail and the whisper of wind through the pine trees. The sun was starting its descent toward the western peaks when they finally reached Zachary's cabin. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, built from thick logs chinked with mud and moss. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and Zachary realized he had left the fire banked that morning, a small mercy that meant the cabin would be warm. Here we are, he said, bringing Goliath to a halt. Home. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Lydia down. She practically fell into his arms, her legs shaky from the long ride and the stress. He steadied her, keeping one arm around her shoulders until she found her balance. Easy. You did real good on that ride. Most people are terrified their first time up that trail. I was terrified, she admitted. But you said you had me, and somehow I believed you. Something warm bloomed in Zachary's chest at those words. He had not realized how much he needed to be trusted until this moment, this broken woman choosing to believe his promise. "Come on, let me show you inside. Then I need to unload the supplies and tend the animals. You can sit by the fire and warm up." The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. A large room dominated the space, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove. A door led to Zachary's bedroom, and a ladder climbed to a loft space above. "You will take the bedroom," Zachary said, guiding Lydia toward the door. "I have been sleeping up in the loft anyway. Easier to hear if animals get near the cabin at night. There is a bed, a chest for your things, and I will bring in a wash basin." The bedroom was small but serviceable, with a bed piled with furs and blankets, a wooden chest, and a single window that looked out over the clearing. Lydia stood in the doorway, taking it all in, and Zachary saw some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "It is safe here," she said, more statement than question. "Safest place I know. Nothing gets near this cabin that I do not know about, and I am a light sleeper." She turned to look at him, and for the first time since they met, she smiled. It was small and fragile, but it transformed her face from haunted to something that hinted at the woman she must have been before tragedy struck. "Thank you, Mr. Roth. Zachary, if we are going to be living together, seems silly to stand on formality." "Zachary," she repeated, testing the name. "Thank you, Zachary. I am Lydia." "I know. Pretty name for a pretty girl." She blushed, a hint of color finally touching her pale cheeks. And Zachary realized he needed to get outside before he said something else that made her uncomfortable. He was not good with words. Never had been. But something about Lydia made him want to try. "I will get the supplies unloaded. Make yourself comfortable. There is water in the pitcher by the wash basin. I will start dinner once I am done outside." He left her there and went back out to tend his animals and unload the supplies. Goliath and the mule needed to be brushed down and fed, the supplies needed to be stored, and his trap lines needed checking before dark. But as he worked, he found himself listening for sounds from the cabin, some part of him attuned to the fragile woman now under his protection. When he finally came back inside an hour later, he found Lydia sitting in the chair closest to the fire, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the fear had crept back into her eyes. "Thought maybe you were not coming back," she said quietly. Zachary hung his coat on the peg by the door and came to crouch in front of her chair, putting himself at her eye level instead of looming over her. "Lydia, I will always come back. But if you need reassurance while you settle in, I can check in more often. Pop my head in, let you know I'm still here." Would that be too much trouble? No trouble at all. He stood and moved to the kitchen area, pulling out supplies for dinner. "How do you feel about venison stew? I have some meat from last week's hunt that needs using." "That sounds good. Can I help?" He glanced over and saw her standing now, hovering uncertainly between the chair and the kitchen. "You know how to cook?" "My mother taught me. I am not fancy, but I know my way around a kitchen." "Then sure, company would be welcome. There is an apron on that hook if you want it." They worked together in an awkward but companionable silence. Zachary handled the venison while Lydia started on the vegetables, and he noticed how she positioned herself so she was always within arm's reach of him. When she moved around the kitchen, her hand would brush his arm or shoulder. Little touches that seemed unconscious but constant. He understood. She was checking that he was real, that she was not alone, that she was safe. "The people in town," Lydia said after a while, her knife steady on a carrot. "They acted like there was something wrong with me, because I could not let go, like I was defective or weak. Zachary added the venison to the pot before responding. People fear what they do not understand. They have not been through what you have, so they cannot comprehend needing that kind of contact. But that does not make you wrong, Lydia. It makes you honest about what you need. You really do not mind? If I need to hold on sometimes? He turned to face her fully, this tiny woman with her huge, haunted eyes. I grew up with a little sister who was afraid of storms. Every time thunder rolled, she would come find me and hold my hand until it passed. Did not matter if I was in the middle of chores or reading or sleeping. She needed to hold on, so I let her. Made her feel safe, and that was all that mattered. He paused, his throat suddenly tight with old grief. I would give anything to have her grab my hand one more time. So no, Lydia, I do not mind. You hold on as tight and as long as you need to. Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks, and before Zachary could react, she crossed the small space between them and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. He froze for just a moment, surprised by the contact, then slowly brought his arms around her, one hand coming up to rest gently on her back. I am sorry about your sister, she whispered against his shirt. I am sorry about your family, he replied, his voice rumbling in his chest where her ear pressed. But we are both still here, and that counts for something. They stood like that for a long moment, two broken people finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. Finally, Lydia pulled back slightly, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. I am getting your shirt wet. It will dry. Feel better? She nodded. A little. It is strange. I have known you for maybe 4 hours, but I feel safer with you than I did with anyone in town. Maybe because I'm not trying to fix you or hurry you along. You get to heal at your own pace here. They finished making dinner together, and when they sat down to eat at the rough table, Lydia chose the chair closest to his. Her knee pressed against his under the table, that constant need for contact, and Zachary found he did not mind at all. In fact, there was something deeply satisfying about being needed, about being the anchor this woman clung to in her storm. After dinner, Zachary insisted on cleaning up while Lydia sat by the fire. He told her stories about the mountains as he worked, about tracking elk through deep snow, about the time a black bear tried to get into his food stores, and he had to chase it off with nothing but noise and determination. He made her laugh, a small sound like silver bells, and felt something in his chest expand at the sound. When full dark settled over the mountains and the temperature dropped, Zachary built up the fire and showed Lydia where everything was, in case she needed anything in the night. I will be right up there, he said, pointing to the loft. If you need anything, anything at all, you call out. I wake easy. Lydia looked toward her bedroom door, then back at him. What if I have nightmares? Then you come get me, or call out and I will come to you. Whatever you need, Lydia. She bit her lip, clearly wrestling with something. Could you maybe leave your door open? The loft door? So I can hear you breathing? I think that would help. Of course. He had never left that door open in all the years he had been sleeping up there, preferring the privacy and the warmth it trapped. But for her, he would sleep with the whole loft open to the world below. Good night, Zachary. Thank you again. Good night, Lydia. Sleep well. He climbed up to the loft and settled into his bedroll, leaving the small door at the top of the ladder propped open. From here, he could see the dying firelight below and hear the soft sounds of Lydia moving around in the bedroom. Eventually, those sounds stopped, and the cabin fell into the deep silence of the mountain night. Zachary lay awake longer than usual, his mind turning over the day's events. He had lived alone for so long that having another person in his space should have felt intrusive, uncomfortable. Instead, it felt right in a way he could not quite name. The sound of Lydia's breathing from the room below was oddly comforting, a reminder that he was not alone anymore either. He must have dozed off because he woke to the sound of screaming. Lydia's voice tore through the night, raw with terror, and Zachary was down the ladder and through her door before conscious thought caught up with instinct. She was sitting up in bed, eyes open but unseeing, her hands clawing at the blankets like she was trying to dig herself out of something. "Lydia," he said firmly, keeping his distance so he would not scare her worse. "Lydia, you are safe. You are in the cabin. It is Zachary. You are safe." She did not hear him, lost in whatever horror her mind was replaying. He moved closer, repeating her name, and finally her eyes focused on him. The next moment, she launched herself out of the bed and into his arms, her whole body shaking with sobs. "They were on top of me," she gasped. "I could not breathe. I could not move. There was so much blood, and I thought they would find me. I thought, shh, I have you. You are safe now. No one is here but us. You are safe." He held her tight, one hand cradling the back of her head, and let her cry herself out against his chest. Her nightgown was soaked with sweat, and she was shivering despite the warmth of the cabin. When the worst of the storm passed, he said quietly, "Let me build up your fire. You are freezing." But when he tried to pull away, her hands fisted in his shirt. "Do not leave. I am just going to the fireplace, right there. You can watch me the whole time." She released him reluctantly, and he quickly added wood to the fire in the bedroom's small fireplace until flames leapt and crackled. Then he returned to her, sitting on the edge of the bed while she pressed close to his side. "Does this happen every night?" he asked gently. "Most nights. Sometimes I can go back to sleep after, but sometimes I'm awake until dawn." Zachary made a decision that would have shocked his younger self. "Would it help if I stayed? I can sit in the chair here, keep watch. You might sleep better knowing someone is there." "You would do that?" "Lydia, I already told you. Whatever you need." Relief flooded her face. "Yes, please. I think I could sleep if you were here." He pulled the chair close to the bed and settled into it, his long legs stretched out in front of him. Lydia lay back down, but her hand reached out to rest on his forearm, that constant need for contact. He did not move, just let her hold on, and gradually her breathing evened out, and she slipped back into sleep. Zachary sat watch until dawn, dozing occasionally, but mostly just being present. When the first light crept through the window, Lydia was still sleeping peacefully, her hand still resting on his arm. He waited until she stirred before moving, not wanting her to wake and find him gone. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to awareness and then embarrassment. "You stayed all night." "Told you I would. You must be exhausted." "I have sat up all night watching trap lines in the freezing cold. Sitting in a warm cabin watching over a pretty woman is no hardship." She blushed at the compliment, and Zachary realized he had been calling her pretty without thinking about it. But he did think she was pretty, or would be again once the shadows left her eyes and some weight returned to her frame. "How about I make us some breakfast?" he offered, standing and stretching out the kinks from sitting all night. "Then I need to check my trap lines, but I will be back by afternoon. You will be all right here alone for a few hours?" Fear flickered across her face. "How far away are the traps?" "An hour's walk at most, and I will leave you my rifle, show you how to bar the door from inside." Nothing will get in here, and I will be back before you know it." She nodded, trying to be brave. "Okay, I can do that." They made breakfast together, flapjacks and bacon, and Zachary showed her how to make coffee the way he liked it, strong enough to strip paint. She wrinkled her nose at the first sip, and he laughed. The sound rusty from disuse, but genuine. Before he left, he showed her how to work the rifle, where to aim if something dangerous came near. He barred the door from the outside in a way that she could easily undo from inside, but that would take considerable force to break from outside. And he promised, repeatedly, that he would be back soon. The trap lines were more productive than expected. He collected 3 good pelts and reset the traps, his mind half on his work and half back at the cabin. It was strange how quickly he had adapted to having someone there, how his thoughts kept circling back to whether Lydia was all right, whether she needed anything, whether she was afraid. He made it back in just under 4 hours to find the cabin secure and Lydia sitting by the window watching for him. Her face lit up when she saw him approach, and she had the door unbarred and opened before he reached it. "You came back," she said, and he heard the relief in her voice. "Told you I would. Did you doubt me?" "No. Maybe. A little. Everyone else I trusted left, even though it was not their choice. I think part of me expects everyone to disappear now." Zachary set down his pack and the pelts and turned to face her fully. "Lydia, I cannot promise I will live forever. This is hard country and accidents happen. But I can promise that I will never willingly leave you. Not now. Not after bringing you here. You are under my protection, and I take that seriously." "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "Why do you care so much? You do not even know me." He considered his answer carefully. "When I lost my family, I spent years angry at the world. Angry that I was not there, angry that I survived when they did not, angry that no one had been there to save them. I swore if I ever had the chance to help someone who needed it, I would not walk away. You needed help, so here we are. And if I need help for a long time, if I am never normal again, then you stay as long as you need, and normal is overrated anyway." A smile tugged at her lips, the second real smile he had seen from her. It did remarkable things to her face, transforming her from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. He found himself wanting to make her smile more often. The days fell into a pattern after that. Zachary would check his trap lines and hunt while Lydia managed the cabin, cooking and cleaning and gradually exploring the area immediately around the clearing. He noticed she never went far from the cabin, staying always within sight of the door. But it was progress. At night, he sat watch in her room until she fell asleep. And more often than not, he would doze in that chair until morning, rather than climb back to the loft. 2 weeks in, Lydia started talking more about her family. She told him about her father's terrible jokes, her mother's skill with a needle, her brother's dreams of being a lawman. She cried as she talked. But there was healing in the telling, in not keeping the grief locked inside where it could fester. Zachary shared his own stories in return. He told her about his sister Hannah's love of wildflowers, how she would pick huge bouquets and leave them all over the house until their mother pretended to complain, but never actually stopped her. He told her about teaching his sister to fish, about her laughter echoing across the water, about how she never could sit still long enough to actually catch anything. But it never mattered because it was the time together that counted. "You were a good brother," Lydia said one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. "I tried to be. Wish I had been there when it mattered most. You could not have known. That is the cruel part about loss. We never know when it is coming." He looked at her then, this woman who was slowly emerging from her shell of trauma, and felt something shift in his chest. It was not just protectiveness anymore, though that was still there. It was something warmer, something that made him notice the way firelight played in her hair and how her eyes crinkled when she smiled. "Lydia," he said carefully, "you have been here almost 3 weeks now. How are you feeling? Honestly." She considered the question. "Better than I was. I still have nightmares most nights, and I still cannot go far from the cabin without feeling panic. But I can breathe now. I can eat without feeling sick. I can laugh sometimes. That is more than I thought I would ever feel again." "That is good. That is real good." He paused. "Do you still need me in the room at night?" He saw fear flash across her face. "Are you tired of it? I know it is a burden." "No," he interrupted. "That is not what I meant at all. I just wanted to make sure you still needed it, that I was not assuming. I will sit there every night until you do not need me anymore, Lydia. I just want to make sure I am helping, not hovering." She reached out and took his hand, a gesture that had become familiar, but still sent warmth through him every time. "You help, more than you know. I do not think I could sleep at all without you there." "Then that is where I will be." October gave way to November, and the first heavy snows came to the mountains. Zachary had stocked the cabin well, but he increased his hunting to make sure they had enough meat to last through the worst of winter. Lydia seemed to find purpose in preserving what he brought back, smoking venison and salting meat, rendering fat for candles and cooking. She was still thin, but color had returned to her cheeks, and she smiled more often than she cried now. She still needed contact, still reached for his hand or arm regularly, still slept better when he was near. But it had shifted from desperate terror to something else, something that felt more like choice than necessity. Zachary found himself touching her too, not just allowing her touch. His hand would rest on her shoulder when he passed behind her chair. He would tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear when they worked together in the kitchen. He would pull her close when they sat by the fire in the evenings, her head resting against his shoulder while he read aloud from one of his few books. He was falling for her, he realized one night as he sat watching her sleep. This woman who had come to him broken and terrified had somehow become the center of his world. He looked forward to coming home from trap lines now, eager to see her face light up at his return. He caught himself smiling at nothing because she had said something funny at breakfast. He lay awake at night thinking about her instead of sleeping, even though she was right there just feet away. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. One particularly cold November afternoon, Zachary returned from hunting to find Lydia kneeling by the fireplace, crying. He dropped his rifle and was at her side instantly, his hands on her shoulders. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "I went outside today, all the way to the tree line, by myself." Pride and relief flooded through him. "Lydia, that is amazing. I was terrified the whole time, but I did it, and I came back, and I was okay. I am getting better, Zachary. Slowly, but I am getting better." He pulled her into a hug, his arms wrapping tight around her. "You are doing so well. I am so proud of you." She pressed her face into his neck, and he felt her breath warm against his skin. "I could not have done any of this without you. You gave me a safe place to heal. You let me hold on when I needed to, and you never made me feel like I was too much." "You were never too much," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You were exactly what you needed to be." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, and something in her eyes made his breath catch. She studied his face like she was seeing him for the first time, her gaze tracing over his features with an intensity that made his heart pound. "Zachary," she whispered, "can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you think you could ever care for someone like me? Someone damaged and afraid? Someone who needs too much?" His heart clenched at the vulnerability in her voice. "Lydia, I already care for you. More than I probably should, more than is wise. And you are not damaged. You are healing. There is a difference." "I care for you too," she said, her voice barely audible. "I think I have for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it, afraid you only saw me as some broken thing to fix." "I see you," he said firmly, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I see a woman who survived hell and came out the other side fighting. I see someone strong and brave, someone who laughs at my bad jokes and makes the best flapjacks I have ever tasted. I see someone beautiful, inside and out. That is what I see, Lydia." Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but these were different. These were tears of relief and hope. "Could you maybe see me as someone you could love? Eventually?" He leaned down until his forehead rested against hers, his thumb wiping away her tears. "Lydia Sutton, I think I already started falling in love with you. Pretty sure it happened somewhere between the first time you smiled at me and every moment since." Her breath hitched. "Really? Really? But I did not want to push. Did not want you to feel pressured or obligated because you needed me. I wanted you to heal first, to be sure of what you felt." "I am sure," she said, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "I am absolutely sure. You make me feel safe and wanted and like maybe I could be happy again. I do not want to just be your responsibility, Zachary. I want to be yours." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, aware that this was likely her first kiss or close to it. She was only 21, had probably been courted back in Illinois, but nothing serious. She responded hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, her hands sliding up to link behind his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary could not stop smiling. "So, does this mean you are staying? Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to?" "It means I am staying because I cannot imagine being anywhere else," Lydia said. "You told me I could hold on as long as I needed to. I think I am going to need to hold on forever." "Good," he said, pulling her close again. "I never wanted you to let go anyway." They spent the rest of that afternoon wrapped in each other, talking about the future for the first time instead of just surviving the present. Zachary told her about the improvements he wanted to make to the cabin, maybe adding another room, building a better barn for the animals. Lydia talked about planting a garden in the spring, about learning to tan hides so she could make things to sell in town. That night, when bedtime came, Lydia took his hand and said quietly, "Will you still stay with me, even though things have changed between us?" "Every night," he promised, "until you tell me otherwise." "What if I never tell you otherwise?" "Then I guess I will be sleeping in that chair for a long time." She bit her lip. "That chair cannot be comfortable." "It is not," he admitted with a wry smile. "The bed is big enough for two people, if we were married." She rushed on before he could respond. "Not that I am proposing or assuming or anything. I just meant that if we were going to be together, properly together, eventually we would need to think about marriage because I cannot live in sin and I do not think you would want to either. And I am talking too much, are not I?" Zachary laughed, the sound echoing through the cabin. "Lydia, are you asking me to marry you?" She flushed red. "Maybe. I do not know the proper way to do this. My mother would be horrified at my forwardness." He took her hands in his, suddenly serious. Then let me do this properly. Lydia Sutton, you came into my life like a force of nature, and you turned everything upside down in the best possible way. I love you. I love your strength and your vulnerability, your determination and your need, everything about you. I want to spend the rest of my life being the person you hold on to, the person who holds you right back. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling so wide it must have hurt. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. They would have to wait until spring to actually get married. The winter snows were too deep to risk the journey to town for a preacher, and Zachary was not about to put Lydia through that hardship. But they considered themselves engaged from that moment forward, and somehow that made everything feel even more real. The winter months passed in a cocoon of contentment. Zachary taught Lydia to shoot, to track, to read the weather in the clouds. She taught him to cook properly instead of just roasting meat over a fire, to enjoy music even if it was just her singing while she worked, to talk about feelings instead of bottling them up inside. Her nightmares became less frequent. Some nights she slept straight through, peaceful and calm. Other nights, the terrors came back, and Zachary would hold her until they passed, whispering reassurances and promises of safety. She still needed contact, still reached for him throughout the day. But it was different now. It was not desperation. It was affection. It was love. They spent long winter evenings planning their future. Zachary wanted at least 4 children, boys to teach hunting and trapping, girls to fill the cabin with laughter like Hannah once had. Lydia wanted a big garden and maybe some chickens, animals she could tend that would give the homestead a feeling of permanence. They talked about building a bigger cabin eventually, maybe even hiring help if the trapping continued to be profitable. In February, during a rare warm spell, Zachary took Lydia on a walk through the snow-covered forest. They stopped at a frozen waterfall, the ice crystals catching the sunlight like diamonds, and Lydia gasped at the beauty of it. "I never imagined Montana could be so beautiful," she said, her hand tucked securely in his. "It has its moments," Zachary agreed, "but it is better with you here." She leaned against his side, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They stood there for a long time, just being together in the quiet majesty of the mountains. "Do you ever regret bringing me here?" Lydia asked after a while. "Your life was simple before I complicated it." "My life was empty before you filled it," he corrected. "And complicated is good. Complicated means there is something worth caring about." "I love you, Zachary Roth." "I love you too, Lydia Sutton, soon to be Lydia Roth." "That sounds perfect." When spring finally came in late March, the snow melted into rushing streams and the first green shoots pushed through the thawing earth. Zachary made the decision to take Lydia down to Bozeman so they could arrange for a wedding. She was nervous about facing the town again, about seeing the people who had judged her so harshly. But Zachary held her hand the entire ride down and reminded her that she was not the same broken girl who had left. Doc Henderson was the first person they visited, and the older man's face split into a huge smile when he saw them together. "I had a feeling this would be the outcome," he said, shaking Zachary's hand and giving Lydia a gentle hug. "You look wonderful, Miss Sutton, truly wonderful." "I feel wonderful," Lydia said, and meant it. "Zachary saved my life." "You saved your own life," Zachary corrected. "I just gave you a safe place to do it." They found a preacher willing to marry them, a kind man named Reverend Walsh, who asked only that they wait 3 days for the banns to be read. Those 3 days were spent in town, staying at the small boarding house and enduring the whispers and stares of townsfolk who remembered the clingy, broken girl from autumn. Mrs. Palmer at the Mercantile was particularly cold until Lydia walked right up to her counter, looked her in the eye, and said clearly, "Thank you for putting together those supplies last fall. I know you disapproved, but Zachary could not have helped me without them. I am grateful." Something in Mrs. Palmer's expression softened. "You do look better, dear. Healthier. Happier." "I am. Zachary taught me that needing help is not weakness, and the right person will never make you feel like you are too much." The older woman's eyes flickered to Zachary, who stood behind Lydia with his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "He is a good man. Rough around the edges, but good. You did well, Miss Sutton." "I know," Lydia said, smiling up at Zachary. "I am the luckiest woman in Montana." On a sunny April morning, with Doc Henderson and his wife as witnesses, Lydia Sutton married Zachary Roth in the small church at the edge of Bozeman. She wore a simple dress that Mrs. Palmer had helped her alter, and Zachary wore his cleanest shirt and had actually trimmed his beard for the occasion. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with a tenderness that made even the Reverend smile. The ride back to the cabin felt different this time. Lydia was not a rescued victim being taken to safety. She was a wife going home with her husband, a woman who had chosen her future and was excited about it. When they reached the clearing and she saw the cabin, she felt her heart swell with love for this place that had become her sanctuary. That night, as they lay together in the bed that was now theirs rather than just his, Lydia traced patterns on Zachary's chest with her fingers. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "Happier than I have been in 14 years, he said honestly. "You brought life back to this place, Lydia. Brought life back to me. You taught me I did not need to be ashamed of needing someone. That holding tight was not weakness. And I meant every word. I never wanted you to let go. I still do not." She snuggled closer, her arm draped across his waist, her leg tangled with his. This closeness that had started from trauma and need had transformed into intimacy and love, and it was the most natural thing in the world. "Good," she whispered, "because I am never letting go." The summer of 1878 was the happiest either of them could remember. Lydia planted her garden, and Zachary built her a chicken coop that housed 6 hens and a rooster. The chickens were hilariously dramatic, and Lydia delighted in them, naming each one and talking to them like they were pets. Zachary watched her with those chickens and felt his heart expand with love. They fell into the rhythm of married life with surprising ease. Zachary still ran his trap lines and hunted, but he found himself rushing through the work so he could get back to Lydia sooner. She still reached for him constantly, her hand finding his whenever they were close, but it was natural now, an expression of love rather than fear. In August, Lydia realized she had not had her monthly courses in quite some time. Doc Henderson confirmed what she suspected when they made their quarterly trip to town. She was pregnant. Zachary's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He picked her up and spun her around right there in the doctor's office, laughing with pure joy. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are having a baby?" Lydia agreed, her own laughter mixing with happy tears. The pregnancy was relatively easy despite their isolation. Doc Henderson gave them instructions and supplies, and Lydia bloomed with health as the months passed. Zachary was simultaneously excited and terrified, remembering how many women died in childbirth. But he tried not to let Lydia see his fear. She saw it anyway because she knew him too well now. One night in late January, as they lay together with his hand spread across her swollen belly, she said quietly, I am going to be fine. We are both going to be fine. You cannot know that. No, but I believe it. And you taught me that sometimes belief is enough to hold on to. He kissed her then, pouring all his love and fear and hope into that kiss. I cannot lose you, Lydia. You are my whole world. You will not lose me. I am too stubborn to leave you now. In March of 1879, during a late snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin, Lydia went into labor. Zachary had prepared as best he could, bringing in extra water, extra wood, clean linens, and all the supplies Doc Henderson had provided. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of watching his wife in pain, laboring to bring their child into the world. It took 12 hours. 12 hours of Lydia gripping his hand, hard enough to leave bruises, of him helping her walk and squat and pace, of her crying and cursing and then apologizing for cursing. He wiped her face with cool cloths, gave her water when she could drink, and told her over and over how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born. Zachary caught him with shaking hands, this tiny squalling creature that was part him and part Lydia and entirely perfect. Lydia was exhausted but glowing, reaching immediately for the baby. A boy, she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she cradled their son. We have a son, Zachary. He is perfect, Zachary said, his voice choked with emotion. You are perfect. You did it, Lydia. You did so good. They named him Nathan, after Lydia's brother, and Zachary's middle name. Little Nathan Roth had his mother's blonde hair and his father's gray eyes, and Zachary fell completely in love the moment he looked at him. The first weeks were hard in the way all new parenting was hard. Nathan cried at all hours, needed constant feeding, and had an impressive ability to need a clean diaper at the worst possible moments. But Zachary and Lydia worked together, taking turns soothing him, figuring out as they went what worked and what did not. Zachary would walk the cabin at 2 a.m. with Nathan against his chest, singing the half-remembered lullabies his own mother had sung. Lydia would sit in the rocking chair Zachary had made for her, nursing Nathan while reading aloud from books so their son would grow up loving stories. They were exhausted and overwhelmed, and happier than either had thought possible. When spring came and the snow melted, Zachary took his family down to Bozeman so Doc Henderson could check on Lydia and the baby. The townsfolk who had once judged Lydia now smiled at the sight of the young family, the mountain man and his wife and their healthy son. You look good, all of you, Doc Henderson said after examining them. Parenthood suits you both. Best thing that ever happened to me, Zachary said, his arm around Lydia's shoulders while she held Nathan. Well, second best after Lydia saying yes to marrying me. I think I was always going to say yes, Lydia admitted. From the moment you told me holding on was not too much, I knew you were the one. They visited the mercantile to stock up on supplies, and Mrs. Palmer fussed over baby Nathan like he was her own grandchild. Such a beautiful baby, she cooed. You two did well. Thank you, Lydia said. Then, with deliberate eye contact, she added, Thank you for everything, Mrs. Palmer. I know you thought I was too much back then, but you still helped. That mattered. Mrs. Palmer had the grace to look embarrassed. I was wrong about you, dear. You were not too much. You just needed someone who understood. I am glad you found him. As they rode back up to the cabin that evening, Nathan sleeping in a sling against Lydia's chest, she said, Do you ever think about how different things could have been if you had not come to Doc Henderson's that day? Zachary considered it. I think we were meant to find each other. Maybe not the way we did. Maybe without all the pain that brought you here. But somehow, some way, I think we would have ended up together. You really believe that? I do. Some things are just meant to be, Lydia. And you and me. We were always meant to be. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Nathan grew from a baby into a toddler, then a little boy with his mother's smile and his father's love of the outdoors. When he was 2, Lydia got pregnant again, and in the spring of 1882, they welcomed a daughter they named Hannah, after Zachary's sister. Little Hannah had dark hair like her father and blue eyes like her mother, and she had Zachary wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. 2 more children followed, a son named Michael in 1884 and another daughter, Emma, in 1886. The cabin that had once been a solitary man's retreat was now bursting with life and noise and love. Zachary expanded it over the years, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger main room, building a proper barn and a bigger chicken coop, because Lydia's flock had grown to 20 birds that she still insisted on naming and talking to. Through it all, Lydia still reached for Zachary constantly. Her hand would find his across the dinner table. She would lean against him while they sat on the porch watching the children play. She would curl into his side at night, even after the children were born. That need for contact still present, but transformed into something beautiful. And Zachary never, ever minded. He would hold her close and think about the broken woman who had come to him so many years ago, the woman everyone said clung too tight. He thought about how that clinging had saved her, had given her an anchor while she healed. And he thought about how that same quality, that fierce need to hold and be held, had become the foundation of the strongest, most loving marriage he could have imagined. On their 10th wedding anniversary, after the children were asleep and they sat together on the porch watching the stars, Lydia said, "Do you remember what you told me that first day, when I asked if you minded that I needed to hold on?" "I said hold on as long as you need to," Zachary replied, his arm around her shoulders. "And I said, what if I never stop? What if I need to hold on forever?" "And I said that was fine with me, that I never wanted you to let go anyway." She smiled, that same smile that still made his heart skip. "I meant to tell you something then, but I was too afraid. I was already starting to fall in love with you. Even in that moment, terrified and broken as I was, something in me recognized you, recognized home." Zachary pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I felt it too. Thought I was crazy, falling for a woman I had just met. But there was just something about you, Lydia. Something that called to something in me. They said I clung too tight," she whispered. "Made me feel like there was something wrong with me. They were fools. You loved deeply, needed honestly. That was never wrong. It just took finding the right person who wanted to be held on to just as tightly as you needed to hold. And that was you. That was me, is me, will always be me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside, their children slept safe and warm, the product of a love that had been forged in trauma and tempered in patience. Lydia thought about the girl she had been, stumbling into Bozeman covered in blood and terror, unable to let go of anyone who showed her kindness. She thought about how she had been judged, how people had made her feel defective for needing what every human needs: connection, safety, love. And then she thought about Zachary, the mountain man who had looked at her desperate clinging and said it was perfect, who had not just tolerated her need, but had embraced it, had built a life around being her anchor, who had taught her that the right person would never make her feel like too much. "Thank you," she said quietly. For what? For seeing me. Really seeing me. Not just the trauma or the fear, but the person underneath. For loving me exactly as I was, as I am. Zachary turned her to face him, his calloused hands gentle on her face. Lydia, you were the easiest person I have ever loved, because you never pretended to be something you were not. You needed help, so you asked for it. You needed to hold on, so you did. There was no game playing, no false pride, just honesty. That is a rare and beautiful thing. She kissed him then, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. I love you, Zachary Roth, more than I can ever say. I love you too, Lydia Roth, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it. They eventually went inside to bed, lying together in the familiar comfort of 10 years of marriage. Lydia draped herself across Zachary like she had every night since their wedding, her arm across his chest, her leg tangled with his, her head tucked under his chin. He held her close, one hand stroking her hair, breathing in the scent of her. Never let go, he whispered into the darkness. Never, she promised. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and challenges as all lives do. Their children grew, each one showing their own personality and talents. Nathan proved to be a natural tracker like his father, spending hours in the woods learning the ways of animals and weather. Hannah was gentle and nurturing, adopting every injured animal she found and nursing it back to health with her mother's patient care. Michael was clever with his hands, always building things, taking apart mechanisms to see how they worked. And Emma, the baby, was bold and fearless, climbing trees and exploring the wilderness with an enthusiasm that gave both parents heart attacks regularly. Through it all, Zachary and Lydia remained each other's center. They still touched constantly, still reached for each other across rooms and across years. The townsfolk of Bozeman, who had once whispered about the clingy girl and the mountain man, now pointed to them as an example of true love. Young couples asked them for advice, and Zachary's answer was always the same. Find someone who loves you for who you are, not who they want you to be. In 1892, 15 years after they first met, Zachary took Lydia back to the spot where he had proposed, the frozen waterfall that was now running with spring melt. Their children were old enough to watch themselves for a few hours, and he wanted time alone with his wife. Remember this place? He asked as they stood by the rushing water. How could I forget? You told me my life was empty before I filled it. That complicated was good. I meant every word. This life with you, raising our children, building this family, it is everything I never knew I wanted until I had it. Lydia leaned against his side, and he wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them watching the water cascade over the rocks. I was so broken when I came here, she said quietly. I did not think I would ever be whole again. You were never broken, just hurt. There is a difference. You always say that. But Zachary, I really was a mess. The nightmares, the panic, the constant need to hold on to someone, that was not normal. Normal is overrated. And you know what? You still reach for me all the time. You still need that contact, that connection. It is just part of who you are, and I love that about you. She turned in his arms to face him. You really do not you? After all these years, you still love that I need to be close to you. Lydia, I spent 14 years alone in these mountains, not letting anyone get close because I was too scared of losing them. Then you came along and demanded closeness, refused to let me stay distant. You taught me that connection is worth the risk of pain. So yeah, I love that you need to be close. I need it too now. Could not imagine going through a day without your hand finding mine. I love you so much, she said, tears gathering in her eyes. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I got so lucky. We both got lucky. We found each other when we needed each other most, and we built something beautiful together. They stood there for a long time, holding each other by the waterfall, two people who had found healing and love in each other's arms. Eventually, they headed back to the cabin, back to their children and their life. But that moment stayed with both of them. As the 20th century approached, their children began to grow up and start their own lives. Nathan, at 18, announced he wanted to be a guide, taking people into the wilderness and teaching them to survive like his father had taught him. Zachary helped him set up his business, proud beyond measure of the man his son had become. Hannah, at 16, had become a skilled healer, learning from Doc Henderson during their quarterly visits to town. The old doctor was talking about her apprenticing with him properly, maybe even becoming a doctor herself if she was willing to go to medical school back east. It was a bold dream for a mountain girl, but Zachary and Lydia supported it wholeheartedly. Michael and Emma were still young, 13 and 11 respectively, but both showed signs of their own unique paths. Michael wanted to be an inventor, always sketching designs for new tools and mechanisms. Emma talked about traveling, seeing the world beyond Montana's mountains. They are all leaving us, Lydia said one night, a trace of sadness in her voice. Growing up and finding their own ways. That is what we raised them to do, Zachary reminded her gently. To be strong and independent, to know their own minds. I know. I am proud of them. It is just strange to think of the cabin being quiet again. He pulled her close. Hey, we started out just the two of us. We will be fine, just the two of us again. Besides, they are not gone yet. We have a few more years of chaos and noise before we have to worry about empty nest. She laughed. That sound that still made his heart skip after 20 years together. Promise me something? Anything. When they are all gone, when it is just us again, promise me we will still be us. Still reaching for each other, still holding on. Lydia, I have held on to you for 20 years. I am not stopping now. You are stuck with me until we are old and gray, and even then, I am going to be that old man who holds his wife's hand everywhere they go. Good. Because I am going to be that old woman who clings to her husband like he might disappear if she lets go. Perfect. That sounds absolutely perfect. In 1897, 20 years after their first meeting, Zachary and Lydia celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and a growing number of grandchildren. Nathan had married a smart, capable woman named Sarah, and they had two young sons who adored their grandfather and begged him for wilderness stories. The cabin was packed with family, with laughter and love, and the kind of joy that comes from people who genuinely like each other. As Zachary watched his family, he thought about that day in 1877 when he had walked into Doc Henderson's house and met a broken young woman who could not stop clinging to people. He thought about how everyone had said she was too much, too needy, too damaged. He thought about how he had looked at that same woman and seen someone who just needed to be told that holding on was okay. And he thought about how that decision, that moment of choosing to help someone who needed help, had given him everything that mattered. A wife he adored, children he was proud of, grandchildren who would carry on the family line, and a love story that proved that sometimes the people who seem too much are actually exactly what you need. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, scattered throughout the expanded cabin and in temporary bedrolls in the barn, Zachary and Lydia lay together in their bed. She was 41 now, He was 52, and both of them showed the marks of a life lived hard but well. Her blonde hair had threads of silver, his beard was more gray than brown, and their hands were marked with the scars of work and time. But when she reached for him in the darkness, when her hand found his and held on tight, he felt exactly as he had 20 years ago. Needed, wanted, and deeply, profoundly grateful. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet. "For what, love?" "For that day. For coming to Doc Henderson's house. For offering me a place to heal. For never making me feel like I was too much. For loving me." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Thank you for holding on. For trusting me with your fear and your healing. For building this life with me. For being exactly who you are. I love you, Zachary Roth. I love you, Lydia Roth. Forever and always." She moved closer, curling into him the way she had 10,000 times before. And he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the moon. But inside the cabin, all was warm and safe and filled with love. They had started as two broken people finding each other in tragedy. He had been alone for so long, he had forgotten what connection felt like. She had been so shattered, she could not function without holding on to another person. Together, they had built something neither could have imagined. A family, a home, a love that had lasted 2 decades and showed no signs of fading. The people in town had said she clung too tight. But Zachary Roth, mountain man and father and husband, had always known the truth. She was not too much. She was exactly enough. And he had never wanted her to let go anyway. As sleep claimed them both, their fingers remained intertwined. Two people who had learned that sometimes holding on tight was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. And in the morning, when they woke to the sounds of their children and grandchildren stirring, when another day in their beautiful, complicated life began, they would still be holding on. Just the way they liked it, just the way it was always meant to be.